Try not to do a lot of nerves.
Okay.
Try not to.
And if I do have them,
Right.
that's how I feel about the situation. Hello, is it on? Yes, it is. All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, Fort Wayne and Northeast Indiana, for coming to this month's Diversity Dialogue. My name's Heather Essex Guy. This is the first Diversity Dialogue that I get to host, and I'm super honored. So yes, today's conversation will be about criminalization and race, no more, transitioning from enforcement to engagement. So we do have a couple of rules that we like to set before we go forward in these conversations. To facilitate an open and honest discussion, we abide by these rules at each of our diversity sessions. We ask that you humble yourself in the name of learning. We ask that you open yourself to new ideas. I like to say have an open heart, an open mind, and open ears. Give everyone a chance to speak. One person talks and everyone will listen. We like to attack the problem, not the person. We also ask that you respect the confidentiality of the personal views and stories shared during this experience. At the YWCA, we also have the Level Up Council, where we believe that our community can only truly prosper when each member is accepted, supported, and valued. The YWCA Northeast Indiana is taking deliberate action to educate, empower, and unite people through programs designed to create inclusion and build racial equity. Our vision is to help our region become the equitable place we know it can be. It's time to level up with Northeast Indiana, and we are open to inviting community partners in with that council. All right, so my name's Heather Guy. I'm one of your guest speakers. You get to indulge me in a small lecture today, so thank you for that. You can read all this. I don't necessarily have to read it all for you. I think the most important thing to know about me is that I'm a proud Hoosier girl, and I'm proud to represent Fort Wayne. I also believe that it is a blessing to be someone's blessing. Okay, so today I'll have a little bit of a lecture. I promise not to bog you down too much, but I do want to talk about some of the framings we use in the conversation of criminalization and race. When engaging this topic, it was one of the questions I had for myself was, what do I have to contribute to this conversation? I feel like we talk about criminality and race in so many different ways, whether that's strictly law enforcement. Through education, we understand pathologizing behavior, housing, economic, political implications. I feel like in so many ways we talk about criminality and race and kind of like the negative associations we have in race. So I wasn't sure what I could contribute to that space. So it became more important for me to possibly ask ourselves as a community if we can reframe this conversation to move away from pathologizing Black and brown people and communities to kind of figuring out better ways in which we can engage what our true intentions are and what those communities actually need. So to understand what we're trying to get away from, I want to focus on the concept of enforcement. The Oxford definition of enforcement is the strict enforcement of environmental regulations. So essentially in terms of criminal justice, it's to protect lives and property. I picked up this from kind of like a police officers coalition. So from the language of people in law enforcement, their primary function of law enforcement, their agencies are investigation, apprehension, and detention of suspected individuals, so this is how police officers see their work. And I think We don't have to answer this right now, but I think maybe what we can do is reflect as I'm sharing some of this information with you on how this lens is experienced differently by our Black and brown populations. So I will be sharing the scholarship of Dr. Jose Peter Mbuba. He is a professor here at Purdue Fort Wayne. He is the chair professor of criminal justice in the Department of Criminal Justice and Public Administration. He was not able to be here. He is actually, I think, in Zimbabwe doing some work there, but he gave me permission to share his scholarship, and we had a couple conversations regarding how he sees the importance of his work and the potential interventions. So two of his studies, one is called The Overrepresentation of Racial Minorities in Arrest Statistics, Revisited, More Involvement or More Enforcement. And then another study called What If the Black Officer Was Female? Race and Gender Characteristics in Arrest Practices. So I think one of the reasons why I wanted to use his work is because his work pertains to Fort Wayne specifically. He uses crime and statistic data from Fort Wayne specifically. And he has also shared his scholarship with local officials, and also he has shared his scholarship with the Department of Justice in terms of kind of figuring out new approaches to law enforcement. So first, the effects of officers' race and gender, so that second study. I will read this, and then I'm going to do some synopsis of his studies so we don't have to necessarily get in the weeds. But I think one of the most important things to take away, he states, the primary objective of the study is therefore to provide a deeper understanding of intraracial, intragender, and race-gender correlates between the arresting officers. The study provides an analytic explanation of the possible causes of existing arrest patterns and extrapolates policy implications in relation to existing mechanisms of alleviating conceptually adverse patterns. Okay, so basically this study points towards the dynamics of race and gender of individuals who are acting on behalf of law enforcement mechanisms. So the frame that he uses in terms of how these practices are enforced are through the conventional perception model. Officers' arrest behavior is influenced by public stereotypes regarding police-community relationships. That is to say that most citizens assume that white males are positioned as the law enforcement and Black males are the criminal offender. So we know that this kind of conventional perception models doesn't just apply to those in law enforcement. We as individuals are exposed to the same kind of elements that for those individuals in law enforcement who perceive the power position of an officer as a white male and mostly criminals as Black males, we're all exposed to those same kind of conditioning factors. These are just individuals who go into law enforcement with this conventional perception model. I feel like that's very important for us to keep up front. And then there's the deployment practices model, where the department assigns patrol according to their racial backgrounds and with conscious regard to the racial and gender composition of the places to be patrolled. So this, I think, is certainly a well-intended intervention in terms of the approach to law enforcement in neighborhoods. The idea that we send people who look like they're from the community in to patrol those. I think it's certainly well-intended, but I think there are implications for those individuals in law enforcement, but also the communities that are affected by this practice. So some of his conclusions from this study, the effects of officers' race and gender, is that the presence of racial minority officers did not affect racial minority arrests. So with that intention of sending people who look like the community into the community, it does not necessarily positively impact arrest rates. But it does provide cover for against racial bias during arrest. So it does function in one way. The presence of racial minority officers did have a significant increase in the number of white arrests. I think you can make your own conclusions regarding how that number is impacted. A white suspect is more likely to be arrested if the arresting officer is white and male. You can also make your own conclusions about the power dynamics behind that statistic. A racial minority suspect is more likely to be arrested by a female officer. Okay, so moving on more specifically to his study that follows racial makeup of arrest. It is for January through December 2005. I think one of the things we can agree on is that the findings are probably trans-historical at this point. Well, the numbers may be different, but I'm sure the conclusions you could draw from it are very similar. So some of the things that he tracked were the demographics of those arrested, the offense data, and then the derivative data. Numbers. Okay, so this part, let me just walk you through how I would read some of this. So in the first table here, he has total arrests by race. I would first look at the last column of total population according to race. And then I would have you look at the first column of total arrests according to race. And then I would have you look at the second column, percent of total arrest. And then I would have you look at arrests per 10,000 population. So with numbers like these, it supports sort of concepts that we may harbor in ourselves, where we could say that crime in Black communities are heavily related. So if you look at it numerically, you could say that's where our intervention needs to be, if that makes sense. That's a logical conclusion because the numbers point out that in the Black community, the crime or the arrests are higher. I would also encourage you to look at the second table, arrest categories by race. One of the things to keep in mind that Dr. Mbuba helped me understand is that the different categorizations of arrest matter. So felony is, think of more prison-related offenses. Misdemeanors will probably get you some jail time. Infractions and local ordinances can culminate in jail and/or fines. So that's how we understand the necessity of breaking down these different categories of arrest. Again, I would have you look at the last column, total arrests by race, and then go through the arrest categories by race as well. So you can see what groups are represented higher in felonies, misdemeanors, and infractions in local ordinances. But if you have trouble reading numbers, I can just break it down for you with Dr. Mbuba's scholarship. So when it comes to felony arrests, so looking at prison time, Blacks are arrested more for robbery, auto theft, murder, and drug violations. Whites are arrested more for felonies like rape, arson, and child molestation. Blacks and whites were in tandem for burglary and theft, although Blacks were arrested 6.9 times more than whites. And Latinos were fairly conspicuous in drug violations, burglary, and theft, even though they were arrested 2.2 more times than whites. For misdemeanors, so jail time, Blacks were arrested more for battery, driving violations, and drug offenses. Whites were arrested more for criminal conversion, public intoxication, and drunk driving. Blacks were arrested 4.1 times more than whites, and Latinos were arrested 2.3 times more than whites. So with infractions in local ordinances overall, blacks were arrested 7.8 more times than whites, and Latinos were arrested 12.2 times more than whites. All other racial groups were arrested 2.3 times more than whites. What I thought was interesting was the scholarship around acquittals. So for felonies, blacks were acquitted 1.4 times more than whites, and Latinos were, their acquittal rate was 1.1 times more than whites. And you can read through the rest of it. I don't necessarily want to be redundant here, but I think one of the things that is important to understand here is that between felonies, misdemeanors, infractions, and local ordinances, there is more leeway to interpret infractions in local ordinances, for example. I can choose whether I'm going to write you up or let you go with a warning, right? I can say, instead of a misdemeanor, let's just call this an infraction, and yes, you have to go to court, but it's not as tough. I think what we're seeing in some of these patterns or in these numbers is that sometimes it's easier to maybe stick it to the black and brown communities. Okay, so largely, I guess I started here, or went into this, but selective enforcement, I think Dr. Mbuba's scholarship points out that this practice leads to pathologizing and over-policing black and brown communities. I think this was especially profound in the relationship of intraracial, intragender dynamics, that even for those minorities who work as a vehicle of law enforcement, that even they find it easier to arrest people in the minority communities. I just explained that in the realms of misdemeanors and local infractions, officers have more leeway to exercise discretion. Police officers of all races seem to find arresting minorities a little easier. When it comes to acquittal, I think it became clear when it comes to minorities, assumptions may lead to arrest first and figuring it out later. That high acquittal rate really stood out to me, which means that a lot of people are wrongly arrested and then they just figure it out later. I think with interracial dynamics, what was profound to me is that the white to minority arrest ratio is more pronounced for less serious offenses. So it might be easier to pull over a white person and arrest them for like a traffic violation than it is to have to investigate them and arrest them for more serious charges. The severity of punishment is selective and it favors white Americans. All right, so I have a little video. I've summarized some of what I think is kind of at issue here is how we frame conversations about interacting with black and brown communities. I'm not necessarily interested in continuing to beat that drum. I am interested in moving forward. So moving on from that in this presentation, I'm going to introduce the idea of moving away from enforcement to engagement, and then we'll move on with Amos Norman and talk about how that is being actually practiced here in Fort Wayne. So just a little video here.
When it comes to human behavior, location matters.
Can you hear?
Let's imagine a place where children repeatedly play. If we step back from our focus on the cluster of kids, we might realize that located where they play exist swings, slides, and open fields. It is features of a place, here suggestive of a playground, that attract children to this location instead of other locations that are absent such entertaining qualities. Features of the landscape are influencing and enabling playful behavior. Crimes also cluster at particular places. I'm not suggesting in any way that these kids are criminals. The analogy is intended to be benign in that respect. But environmental factors can and do influence the seriousness and longevity of crime problems. To study these spatial dynamics of crime, my colleague Les Kennedy and I developed risk terrain modeling in 2009. Risk terrain modeling, or RTM, identifies features of the landscape and identifies how they interact and overlap to create unique behavior settings for crime. RTM is free for anyone to use, with tutorials and many other resources posted online. To make it even more accessible, we developed a free software application that automates the technical process. This process of RTM begins by testing a variety of factors that are thought to be geographically related to crime incidents. Valid factors are selected and then weighted when combined to produce a final model that basically paints a picture of places where criminal behavior is statistically most likely to occur. These steps of RTM are applied consistently from one jurisdiction to another. But what's not routine are the way in which these factors come together in different settings or for different types of crime. Let's think about this through the analogy of a kaleidoscope. The cylinder of the kaleidoscope represents the jurisdiction, or the study setting that we're interested in examining. The shards of glass within the cylinder represent crime attractors, or features of the landscape, such as bars, fast food restaurants, parks, or grocery stores. As we move from environment to environment, it represents a turn of this kaleidoscope, so that the pieces come together in different configurations, each representing unique spatial and situational contexts that have implications for behavior at those places. We know that crimes cluster, but there's no standard explanations for these patterns. So it's not safe to assume that a standard response to crime problems will yield similar returns across all environments. Behavior settings differ, so interventions need to be tailored accordingly. Police use RTM to problem solve in this fashion, to develop risk reduction strategies that are tailored to their unique jurisdictions. As an example, at a task force meeting in Jersey City, a conversation quickly centered around gas stations, which was identified as one of the highest risk factors for violent crime, according to the risk terrain model. Police officers in the room quickly explained how this made sense to them and explained how they had believed gas stations to be problematic for quite some time. RTM validated and confirmed their experienced gut feelings. But then a community stakeholder added to the conversation. She explained how youth tend to hang out after school around corner grocery stores or bodegas because they have food and drinks and rolling paper that they could use to smoke occasionally at nearby vacant buildings. But these bodegas are required to close at 10 p.m. according to city ordinance. Gas stations with food marts, though, are exempt from this requirement. These 24/7 facilities create unique contexts for youth to congregate, and they provide supplies that they're looking for, which could create unique contexts for turf conflict, offending, and even victimization. Now, the vacant buildings and the grocery store bodegas were also identified as top risk factors. So the Department of Public Works added to the conversation. They proposed prioritizing their existing efforts to board up vacant buildings and to clear vacant lots, but to do so near the corner bodegas and near the gas stations with food marts. Representatives from the Department of Public Works, from the Department of Parks and Recreation, as well as from the Mayor's Office, proposed enhancing their advertising and recruitment campaigns for summer recreation activities and job training programs. They proposed going to the corner store bodegas and the gas stations and other places nearby to engage with youth whom they want to recruit into the programs, but do this at places where they spend most of their time. The police department then agreed to deploy directed patrols and meet and greets with managers of risky facilities, and to do so at peak time periods. The police officers promised to make referrals to partnering community agencies and social workers when they came across people who might be in need of support or of support services or outreach. The police department even implemented a new protocol for crime report writing, which was intended to allow for continued and ongoing risk assessments. As you can see from all of this, RTM allows stakeholders at all levels of the community to prioritize their efforts and to engage in coordinated responses. People like to problem solve, but they need the right information. RTM identifies risky places and empowers police to think outside the box of traditional responses to crime, which are often very person-oriented, such as stops, arrests, or citations. Legal scholars have even endorsed RTM as one of the few, if only, methods of crime analysis that preserves the constitutional protections of the Fourth Amendment and increases objectivity and transparency in policing practices. By now, you're probably wondering if focusing on risky places and not people can really reduce crime. And I'm pleased to say that the answer is absolutely yes, it can. With funding that we received from the Department of Justice, we conducted experiments in multiple cities across the United States. Policing activities that are focused on high-risk places yielded many benefits, including 35% fewer gun crimes in Newark, 33% fewer motor vehicle thefts in Colorado Springs, and 42% fewer robberies in Glendale, among many other positive outcomes in all the jurisdictions that we studied.
Let's get back to 1 second. Wait, no. Wait. All right. I'll just gonna leave it at this here. So what I liked about that risk terrain model is that it's an all hands on deck approach to community engagement. So when people take that risk terrain model and then they have it in a conversation in the community, and police officers can sympathize and say, oh yeah, the gas stations seem to attract a lot of violence. It's someone from that community that says, well, you have to understand why kids congregate there. Because if you just stick with that one aspect, well, yeah, we have a lot of police calls at gas stations, then you're pathologizing behavior of youth that is just behavior of youth, right? They're looking for some food, a place to hang out. You know, the gas station is the spot in the neighborhood. So that kind of demonstrates the all hands on deck approach, the kind of engagement, right? By listening to people in the community, you're actually kind of modeling and including that type of engagement that is so important. So if we start to look at engaging Black and brown communities less from enforcement, right? We're here to protect people and property and rules, and more of engagement. What can we do to make your neighborhood more appealing? Ask that question. That helps to kind of create trust and transparency between not just the police department, but the people who are involved in city planning as well, right? And community members. It helps the constituents have a voice in planning and the execution of plans that have an impact on the community's identity. And we can start to wonder how engagement looks different for people of Black and brown communities rather than enforcement. What does that mean? I think one thing that goes overlooked for Black and brown communities is the role in law enforcement in having historically oppressed them, right? So you're telling me on one hand I should respect this law enforcement agency when I know that this same law enforcement agency has been used to deny me rights or deny me access. So I feel like we should be able to understand that conflict that's inherent in Black and brown communities and maybe transition into engagement in those, like, get in their conversations with people of the community. And to exemplify that, I am so excited to introduce my friend, Amos Norman. Before that, well, yes, I do want to say that Amos and I, we've come a long way. And I'm just so happy to share this opportunity in my first diversity dialogue to kind of put a spotlight on the work that he does. I know Amos has impacted lives outside of organizations. I know that he is a gem in Fort Wayne to have, and so I'm super excited to share what he's doing in a very specific neighborhood with very specific programs. So, do you want me to read all of it, Amos?
Don't have to read any of it.
I'll hit the important things. So Amos has been experienced in nonprofit operational functions and program development for over 20 years. He currently serves as a district executive director with the YMCA of Greater Fort Wayne, overseeing Renaissance Point, Central, Skyline, and the Youth Services Bureau branches of the Y. Prior to his work at YMCA, Amos was the Director of Operations for the Boys and Girls Club of Fort Wayne for over 10 years. That's where I know him. Amos graduated from the University of St. Francis with a bachelor's in social work and a master's in organizational leadership from Purdue University. His expertise has helped him develop effective and efficient management and organizational development, as he has established sought-after practices in nonprofit organizations. My friend, Amos Norman.
Thank you. Very kind. Very kind.
Okay, so I invited Amos today to kind of share with us, if you don't mind, will you share with us some of the programs and practices you've used in our community?
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone, for embracing me for a little while as I kind of speak on the work that we're doing at the Y, particularly Renaissance Point. We have a really phenomenal program. It's a late-night basketball program. And there's a lot of people that are in partnership with that. So you have the YMCA of Greater Fort Wayne, you have Fort Wayne United, you have Parkview Community Nursing, and we have the Fort Wayne Mad Ants that are kind of the staple of that program. And what we're doing is, while crime and homicide are statistically at their highest points, we're doing a safe haven basketball program that's providing a lot of opportunity and just really meeting individuals where they're at while letting them know what we're up against. It's more than just basketball. So when you first come in, the first thing that these individuals do is they will have a health screening with the community nursing. Because we know in that particular demographic, in those zip codes, that 03, 06 zip code, individuals are not getting out and getting their health screens. We know that they're going to come play basketball. We know they're going to be a captive audience. So why not provide an opportunity to give something that's going to help them increase their life expectancy and the quality of life? So we have that there. We also bring in the police department from the southeast side that patrol so that they can have conversations, get to know each other, not try to build a relationship as you're being detained, but building a relationship prior to, so that when they see each other out in the streets, they're not strangers. It's really difficult to see a person that you know and you've learned to have some respect and admiration for and not care about them, right? So we're intentional about that. We're bringing in various employers that are looking for individuals to work in their establishments. People need jobs. A lot of what we do is so intentional. A lot of people don't realize that we're just a few years removed from being an all-American city, which is awesome and phenomenal, while at the same time, the 06 and 03 zip codes sit 7th and 8th as the most impoverished zip codes in our entire state of Indiana. The 03 zip code is a staggering $21,000 for the median household income, and the 06 is 28. There's a problem there, right? So people need employment. They need opportunities. We bring in various educational establishments to talk about, the fact that you can go to school and talk about scholarships and what that looks like. That's huge, right? But then I think the other thing we do is we provide an opportunity for them to help write the narrative of Southeast Side. We can say all we want to say, but there is a stigma that comes with it. There's a stigma that comes with being in those areas. There's a stigma that comes with the poverty that comes with that. But people have to understand that, like, it's not really about demonizing you. It's not that you're broken. It's just that you need a little bit of help right now. And I think that it's important. And if you really love someone, the best thing you can do is be absolutely truthful with them, because it's really hard to dissect an issue or a problem without talking about really what it is that you're facing. So we're really real in there. And we let them know that we have to have a place on the Southeast side where individuals can come in and have a good experience. I also pride myself on being that beacon in the Southeast side, that people that know there's something going on and they want to help, but they don't know how to help. I provide that structure for them to walk into and help and be safe and know that they will be accepted as well. So I know I said a lot just now. But.
No, I think one of the things that is important to point out is that the Renaissance Y has become a community hub. And if you're familiar with the area, we know that that space used to occupy the police force. We know that it has a historically bad reputation in this city, that area over there. But what I like about the Renaissance Y is that it has emerged as a hub for all people. I have an aunt who raves about the pool. We have relationships with some of the people that come in and not only participate in basketball, but help run it. Can you talk about the development of this program specifically? Like, how did it come to mind? What did it look like when it came time to getting other people involved?
Yeah, so when I first got there about 6, almost 7 years ago, I know in program development, the most important thing is to really get out and talk to the community about what it is that they want. As a program developer, it's really easy to say, oh, I think you need this. And then you develop it and you put it out there. And that's not what the people want, or they're not ready for it, right? So it's going to be a failed program. So what we've decided was to look at what's really hindering the growth, right? There's like, everybody will love economic development and other things and different attractions to come to the Southeast side. But you do have to understand too that, like, from a business sense, people are going to try to make money. And if that's not a marketable thing, then they're not going to come. And they have rights to put their businesses where they want to, right? So there's an opportunity for us to kind of change that narrative and how that community is perceived. And there's some things that really did need to be cleaned up. So instead of just having this judgment of the people and trying to navigate around the issue, it was, no, let's call to action and let's talk to the people about what the community is saying, right? So we face it head on and we talk about it. I'm big on this. We're at risk, but not broken. That's really important to remember. At risk, not broken, right? That means your margin for error is a lot slimmer than others. So here's what has to happen. We have to have a place where people can come, not just your people, but all people, so that they can see what's going on. There's this quote I really love, and it is, in your absence, a story will be assigned to you. So the more individuals that we can get that are from the outside community to come in and see the positive work that we're doing and why we're doing it, the better off your stories will be when they're assigned to you when you're not there.
I love that. I'm a sucker for a good story. I think we should definitely do more story sharing. I think it helps us see the humanity in each other. And so you were talking about kind of like getting in there in the community and not doing what you prescribe, but actually including the community. Can you talk about what it's like to navigate as one person in between? You know, you have parameters of institutions to work with, but you also are working for the people. Right. Can you just talk about what that role is like for you, that experience has been like?
Yeah, it is a lot to navigate, right? Because on one hand, you have you have a population of very proud people. And then, to be honest, like, Renaissance is theirs, and they feel that, and I love that. But I have to tell the story and say, hey, if you really want it to thrive, you have to share it. You have to share this beautiful thing that you have, and you have to get more people involved and engaged. If you can get more people to love your thing and you're able to share your thing, it's going to be better for all. When I got there, there was this stigma that was the black Y. Mm-hmm. And I quickly made it part of my strategic goal and plan as to make that the Y and just a viable option for the Y, right? If you want to go to the Y and you want to go to Renaissance Point, then go to Renaissance Point because you love that family atmosphere, the socialization, all the things that you're going to get. That stuff is there. I had to combat that. There's a very strong sense of my stuff there that I had to combat. So that's hard, sitting in there every day telling the people that you love them and you're trying to provide opportunity. And I'm trying to get them to trust a population of individuals that it appears that all they're doing is watching and judging, but not actually in there. Mm-hmm. I have to speak on their behalf too. And then when I'm not with the people of Renaissance in that area, I'm out with these individuals saying, no, they're great people. They just need a little bit. I promise. It's not even what you think. If you come in and see, it'll be different. So it's been a slow moving, both sides coming together slowly. But as soon as I get a connection, man, it's there in stone. So you'll see the people that support, it come in a multitude of, areas and everything. We have a little bit of everyone. I have some amazing board members and past board members and friends and colleagues in here right now, and they don't look like me, and that's awesome.
That is awesome. In this position as racial justice coordinator, the need for allies has emerged for me. I feel like we've all had the same kind of conversations and opportunities to understand what diversity, equity, inclusion means and why we need it and things like that. I think what's missing is exactly that in terms of bringing both sides together, because both sides need each other. And so one of my mottos has been that we're not calling people out, but we're calling people in. And I love that you're actually demonstrating that. So I would like to have you maybe share, and you can take a second to think on it, but if you can share with us maybe a time or a story where you, in your position at the Y, when you're like, this is why I do this.
Yeah, quite a few of those. Let's see what a good one is. I'll stay, since we're talking about late night basketball, I'll stay on that. So this program, we could have upwards of 120 young people in this building at any time. And we run the program with no referees and no whistles, which is crazy, right? And if you can't tell, I'm a pretty soft-spoken person. I don't yell. I'm not a yeller, right? So we had this incident, and I could just feel the energy in the building. People come in, they have their teams, and it's highly competitive, and I get that. But there was some friction between these two groups, and they brought this into the building. It wasn't something that developed in there. It was actually two rival schools. We won't name them, but the rival schools, and they're going at it. The game gets super chippy, fouls, hard fouls. And I was getting ready to walk on the court and stop the game and kind of do what I do. I'm like, hey, stop it. We need a place where good things are happening on the southeast side, and this is bigger than you. I'm going to say all this stuff. And then I had this guy, unassuming, did not think that he would ever use his voice to say anything. He stopped the game. And I'm looking like, uh-oh. I don't know his stance or where he's coming from. And he was like, this is bigger than you. You're messing this up for everybody. these people come in and they give their time and they're away from their families and they just care about us, and how dare you disrespect Mr. Amos's stuff, and all he does is try to help our community. And I'm like, I need you as my PR guy to go everywhere with me and talk about how great and awesome my work is, right? But it was such a just moving moment. I actually, nobody knows this, so don't judge me, but I actually went into my office after that, like 5 minutes after, and I actually watered up a little bit. I teared up a little bit because it was like, I was like, thank you, God. We're doing the work. It's not in vain. And there's little things like that that happen. Just watching people self-regulate now
Yeah.
and understanding like why we're here. So that was great for me.
Sure. I think it's a good time to open it up for any questions, if there's any questions from the audience, maybe. Comments, questions, concerns. We'll start. Yep, there you go.
I'm just thinking, I'm guessing this is primarily for guys. Are there women at this late night basketball? Is there something that kind of speaks to?
So it is primarily men. I think that it's important to stay laser focused on something instead of kind of convoluting it. However, there are some women that have played, and we welcome them in, and the men are embracing. So it's good. Doesn't happen all the time, but when they're in there, usually when a woman walks in to play, then she's serious. So they respect that. But yes. No, there's a mic coming.
How do you draw the line in those situations between, the fun of trash talking? Sorry. How do you draw the line between the fun of trash talking when you're, playing basketball? There's a certain amount of, just camaraderie and
Yes.
spirit that's happening. And, oh no, this is too much.
Absolutely. So for one, there's a rule: you don't get to leave mad. You don't get to leave mad. Everything is resolved in that moment. So we'll pull you, and your team will play 4-on-5 until we figure it out. I mean, and it's that big. Just being really bold in confrontation. I'm confrontational. So I'm going to grab you, and I'm going to say, come with me. We need to talk because we can't allow this to spill over. And and one of the things I always talk about is statistics, right? I'm like, most people don't wake up and think, I'm going to get shot today. But somebody has to, and it's happening at a high rate in your area. Are you going to be the one, because of not being able to navigate a particular situation, are you going to be the reason that number continues to live and grow and thrive? So we just make it real, and you have to be real. When you're dealing with something that's so important, you have to tell people what they're really facing. So that's kind of how we do it, boldly.
I also like that is a type of engagement it's a tough love that's modeled. And I know that there are so many men and women who participate and oversee and just contribute to the general, this is a very purposeful, well-intended spot for us to hang out on a late night right now. We're all just here having a good time. And I love that it gives the opportunity for young people in our community to see adults who are polished, and you know what I'm saying? I think it's such a great opportunity to model good behaviors. So, sure.
We just have a question from the live stream chat. Is the basketball program open to anyone, or is it just strictly for people who have Y memberships?
Nope. Free program to anyone. Yes. Great question. Now, I will say this. We're trying to target that. Originally, it was that 16 through 29, but we'll take you a little young and a little old, right? So, yeah, we want it it's for everyone. I think this gentleman right here.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, because my wife and I, we both go to the Y out there. of course, you know that. And we want to exercise, right? But sometimes I'll spend half of my exercise just talking to the other people there. I don't think I've ever been to any other place in the city, Y or otherwise, as an exercise gym format that I felt more comfortable with and more family-oriented. But what I really wanted to ask a question of had to do with this RTM. Because I don't have all the facts, just the story. In Minneapolis, they were having a problem with car thefts. So they put up drones. They moved them to the neighborhoods where the cars were being found at, which was the primarily poor African-American neighborhoods. The cars weren't being stolen from there. They were stolen from the more wealthy white areas. And the comment was, we had to start somewhere. And in my mind, I'm going, well, why didn't they start where the crime happened rather than where it ended up? Okay, so that's just a backstory. But I'm wondering, in this risk terrain model, how does locating risk places not equate to minority neighborhoods, especially when we already know that minority communities are a risk terrain?
Well, I think what the risk terrain model does helps focus on the crime and not the people, right? So just like, for instance, with the acquittal rates, like arrest first and figure it out later, I think that is a concept that is practiced that affects people, if that makes sense. Whereas if I'm locating specific locations, I'm focusing on the activity of that location and not just anybody who just happens to be in the area, if that makes sense, right? So something else I think what it does is point out that I think just the presence of a risk terrain model approach, it points out that, and even Dr. Mbuba's scholarship pointed out, that crime happens because humans, right? And so by taking out this kind of frame of like, we have to enforce and over-police Black people, we can focus our resources more specifically to places. Yes, some of those places are in Black and brown communities, but the risk terrain model allows us not to automatically police them and pathologize them, if that makes sense. It's a more specific allocation of resources. It incorporates not just enforcement, it incorporates city planning. Like in the example, he said they moved the priority to board up empty vacant lots in those areas once they identified that it contributes to crime statistics. That was city planning saying, well, we're going to contribute to this, to solving this issue, right? That's not putting more police officers in that area to patrol those empty spaces, but if we take away those empty spaces, that impacts without pathologizing.
I used to work for city government here, and I haven't heard the term risk terrain model, but I know that one of the things the departments did, to your point, is looked at where streetlights are located and where streetlights were being unrepaired, so there was more darkness, and crime will, gravitate toward darkness. So when they made more of an intentional effort to do regular fixing of the light bulbs, basically, the crime calls went down in those areas, because if you run out the darkness, the little people hiding in the darkness will go away too. It wasn't about people, it was about keeping the whole area safe for whomever was there.
And the 10-point coalition can actually point to that kind of impact, right? So it's a group of people who patrol neighborhoods. They help clean up like the curbside appearance of neighborhoods. I don't know the specific qualitative impact that they have, but if it's not a crime reduction in a neighborhood, it is neighbors feeling safer, right? That's also a trade-off and an impact that will take. That is preventative.
Sorry, I stole the microphone. Can you also tell us, are there other locations that have considered starting a program like late night basketball around our community? It's great that you do it there, but, and obviously a high need area, but I would imagine there are some other places that could benefit from it.
Yeah, sure. We're open to taking the show on the road. I think, again, you have to realize that does the community want that, first of all? And there's a lot of places right now that have open run basketball. That's happening. But they're comfortable getting what they're getting too, right? That's just hooping. Some people are just playing basketball, and that's okay. That's okay. You know what you're getting when you sign up to come to this one particularly, because before we even start any session, I tell them, why are we here? Crime and homicide are statistically at their highest points. I let them know how much I appreciate them for making a choice to put their energy into this program. Thank you for being a part of something bigger than you. I don't know if everybody wants to do that. But if they want to, I'll come and share the model, and we will work hand in hand, and I'll do all I can to make sure it thrives. But if you're going to do it, you have to understand that you're going to get people from the outside community coming in too, or you're not really running the program under the essence and the heart of what it's supposed to be. So I think that you may find that some people avoid programs such as this because they don't want that to be their community right now. You know, one of the things I find is everybody's just waiting. I just need a little bit more time to figure it out. Well, I don't have time to wait, so I'm going to do it over here, and you can come over here and see all the positive stuff, and then please, as I'm not there, and you're assigning my story, please tell all the great things that we're doing, and then we'll try to go about it that way. Cool? There's a gentleman back here in the blue that is itching to say something to you. Yes, sir. I see you. We'll get him too.
So for everybody who knows me, I'm always itching to say something. So Heather, my first question is for you. When we talked about the acquittal stats, is there any data that links how many people were acquitted versus who had like a public defender versus a hired attorney? Do you know if you have any data on that?
No, there wasn't any in his scholarship to reflect that.
Okay, thank you. And then Amos, similar to that, when you talk about having police officers come in, be a part of the program, and then having that knowledge and understanding people, is there any data that suggests that now that the beat cops know a lot of people in the area, is there any reduction in those infractions or those citations? How we talked about it's the difference between, okay, I'm just going to let you go versus I don't care, this is the rule, and now you're going to jail.
Per conversations with the police department, they are saying that they are seeing a drop. There is actually statistics that you can find that are showing that there is a reduction. I like to think that we're a part of it. I don't know that we're the whole thing, but I know that we are positively contributing to that. So, yes.
We hear a lot about the school-to-prison pipeline, and I'm wondering what that looks like in Fort Wayne.
I don't have a number for you. We do know that there is a correlation between Black and brown students who have IEPs that are pathologized and thus ushered into the criminal system. But I hate to say it, but I'm kind of just over that kind of conversation. We know that if you've seen more than one DEI conversation, we know that teachers have been studied to track bad behavior in Black kids. We know that already. And I think sometimes, to a point that he was just making, is that I don't think we allow ourselves to move past that conversation because it's just so easy to be like, yeah, if there's an association, it happens. And now I've tucked that away and I don't have to necessarily do anything about it. I'm certainly more interested in working with teachers to move past that perception and frame. But I don't, besides the fact that it exists and we know it overwhelmingly exists, I don't have anything specific to the Fort Wayne community yet. Besides, I'm just ready to evolve that conversation.
Hi. You've been talking about bringing the outside community in and how you do conversation both ways. You talk to the community, but you also talk to the community that's outside. How do you know when you're talking to the outside community if they're actually your ally or your accomplice versus like sort of the white savior complex? How can you tell what their intentions are? And then also, how do you explain that outside community to the inside community? How do you convince them that these are good people, they actually want to be here and helpful, and that their intentions are good?
Well, real simply, for those of you that don't know me, I am very, very, very bold, blunt, and honest. I'm gonna ask you. Here's the thing. If you're not gonna help me, you're not gonna help me. You know, it's that simple. I don't have time to play games. There's a lot at stake, right? And I'm pretty intense. And I protect the integrity of the work that I'm trying to do. So there are probably some people that I have probably scared away a little bit because the expectation is real, right? For both.
For inside the community and outside of the community.
I'm not going to sit here and allow your inability to want to be a part of something and not the something ruin what we're doing. So I'll just ask those really bold questions. And why do you want to help? What do you perceive the problem is? And why are you trying to occupy this space right now? Because I'm not interested in politics. I'm interested in helping this particular quadrant right now get to a point where we don't lead with, oh, the southeast side, blah, 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 insert narrative. We don't do that with the north. We don't do that. We want to get past that. It's just the Fort Wayne community needs. That's where we want to be. So there are some times, I'll be honest, where it's not a good fit. And it's not because I don't want the partnership. It's just because we're not in the same space, and we will be fighting opposed to moving the efforts forward. Does that make sense? I hope I explained that well. Thank you.
I also think that a person's motivations will emerge at some point when they're tested, when someone talks to you a certain way you're not used to, and that goes for both sides. But motivations will emerge. And I've also found that one of the best things you can do to a person is give them what they think they want, right? So if a person says, I want to help, okay, I'm going to throw you in there. And then we'll see if that's what you still want. If a person says, I need help, well, let me line you up and then see if you're going to, carry the torch yourself or if you really meant what you said or not. So I think motivations are always made clear through a long-term interaction. And I think that's when you can determine that, that's when you can decide, okay, going forward, if we're going to work together, X, Y, Z, or you know what, maybe this isn't a good partnership. So I think in terms of creating allies on both sides, I, as a person to bring communities together, have to reserve space for this is an ongoing partnership, right? So you might stumble, but let's get you back on track. Now, if you can't recover from that stumble, then we have to check those things. So a little bit of grace for everybody, but also still being able to say, but I need you to show up for both sides.
Yeah, we have some participants that come in, and they're coming in from the streets, right? And they're coming in with some of the baggage of that. And instead of facing them like the community and the world typically would, that's a conversation that I have so they can maintain dignity. And it's like, hey, you gotta go get yourself cleaned up. I want you here, but you can't come in here like that, because if you come in here like that, then that shows that we are okay with that in our program. So get yourself cleaned up. You can come back, right? They go, they get cleaned up, they come back, then it's all good. Well, what I mean by that is the behaviors that we don't want, that's what I'm talking about. That's what we're trying to combat in the first place. And that could be, to each his own. But, like, you can't come in smelling like alcohol and drugs. You can't come in threatening and wanting to harm people. You can't come in with a negative attitude like that. Those are the types of things that if you can identify them very early on, call them out early on. Don't sit back and wait for the bomb to go off. And then just say, hey, I could even be wrong. And this is where humility comes in. I could be wrong, but this is what I'm feeling. And they're like, oh, no, my bad. I just had a bad day. Okay, cool. My bad. But I do want you to understand that that's the energy that you put in the atmosphere. So I just want you to be mindful of that, because that could hurt you somewhere else down the road. It's just all about learning. It's just teachable moments and being honest with people, because there's a lot of people that would see an individual and say, oh, man, they're going to be trouble, and then treat them as such. And it could be they just had a bad day, or they're having a bad day. So you just never know. This young lady.
I noticed this week that Southwest Allen County adopted a kind of an All Lives Matter program. I don't know the exact details, but, as we may be aware of what has gone on there has been out in public, and their school not doing anything to respond to those issues publicly, and I'm wondering what are some things that, where we can find ideas of things to do to help that community out. I mean, I don't know, I grew up Southeast Side, so I can't relate to those kinds of beliefs. But when I read that, I was just like, okay, now what can we do? If you have any thoughts.
Amos mentioned that he is a confrontational person. I, too, believe in confrontation, because on the other side of that is resolution. So I think if we're going to have a conversation and talk about reframing how we approach each other and see each other, I think a part of that is having to acknowledge what the problem is and where the problem comes from. We can't hurry up and get past it for the sake of, like, comfortability, because minorities are in positions that are uncomfortable all the time, and to ask us not to have, like, at minimum, restorative conversations so we can reestablish how we talk to each other. I think it's unfair to ask for minorities to hurry up and move along, and to, if it is I don't know, so I'm not speaking from an informed, but I'm saying if it is like an All Lives Matter platform, I think it's doing itself an injustice, because it's asking to hurry up past the conversation rather than get in there and have a real conversation. So that's just off of what you shared with me, how I'd see that. And in any spaces that are open to it, I think having real conversations about how we got here from individual levels, self-reflecting in our experiences and our journeys in our communities, and then, like, what it was like to go into communities that are diverse, right? We have to share those experiences and those perspectives with each other. That way we can create those lines of communication and allyship a little bit better. I hope that helps a little bit.
Well stated.
Well, so it's understood that you have a thriving program right now that focuses on engagement. My question is kind of what you think about the future and any plans. Like, do you plan to focus on late night basketball, or, have different programs or different ideas for engaging into the community?
Yeah, so it has been successful, and I thank the participants. Again, I thank them anytime I can for the success, because it's really about them. I guess the cop-out way to answer that is like, when we put our ear to the streets and see what the community needs, that'll be the call to action, right? Basketball has been a phenomenal tool and carrot to use right now, so we're using it. I feel like it's probably going to be a mainstay. That'll be around, but I do see that there could be some expansion down the road that follows the same principles. I don't think it necessarily has to be basketball. It could be whatever. It could be knitting. If people want to come together and knit when crime and homicide are statistically at their highest points, we'll knit, you know, if that's what the community wants to do. So we're really open, and that comes to that whole program development and being humble about it. It's not what I want to do or what's easy for me. It's what's going to get the most impact. So when we hear it, if you hear something, you let me know, and we'll investigate it. All right.
To the point made by the lady talking about Southwest Allen County schools, one of the things I think is an opportunity in Fort Wayne is the YMCAs. I mean, there's YMCAs throughout the community, right? And I would hope that the other locations are learning from what Renaissance Point is doing and carrying some of that same energy and opportunity to kids in other parts of the community, so that if they're not going to get it at school the way that we'd like to have them hear things, at least there's a place in their lives where they are seeing and hearing maybe an alternate view to some things. Do you feel like the Renaissance Point is unique in the Y organization, or are you able to share some of the learned lessons and spread them to some of the other locations?
Yeah, at this moment, we are absolutely performing in a unique capacity. However, we're having conversations at the leadership level, the highest level, about how we can all kind of get on board with this. So I will tell you, we have our hurdles, but Jorgensen has their hurdles. And they're a little bit different, but the bottom line thing that we're trying to solve is the same. So now we got to figure out a way to go into that community, galvanize that community to decide that they want to take a stand in what it looks like. Anytime you do this type of work, there's something to be lost to, right? The community's different, the composition of it's different, the needs are different, the threats are different. So we have to take in consideration and be a little humble and graceful with them and their pace. My job as somebody that's executing right now is just to make sure that they don't stop moving, and I answer any and all questions that I can answer and help them with the best practices that I can possibly help them with. Yeah.
I have two questions, and I can just throw them out, and you can answer them however you want. The first one was about, someone had talked about midnight basketball being majority male. Do you know if anyone in Fort Wayne has thought about doing something like that for females? I don't know what that would be.
Yes, I have.
Go ahead. Okay.
I have thought about it.
Okay.
It's something that can happen. Now, here's the thing. Don't be fooled by the successes of something that's already happening. There's a whole different, like, girls respond to it differently as well, right? I don't know exactly what girls are doing at the time that crime and homicide are statistically at their highest points. They're doing something, and it hasn't necessarily looked like basketball.
Right.
See, I don't know what it is yet. If you know, please let me know. I'm always open, right? But yes, we have thought about it. We've thought about it from all platforms and all different ways to attack it. So we're always thinking behind the scenes.
Because I do think there's a need for something for that, for younger women in Fort Wayne. But I don't know what it would be either. The second question is about restorative or reparative justice. Can you talk about how you might use that at the Y? Because you're sort of doing it kind of when you talk about pulling people aside and talking to them. Or do you know if it's happening anywhere in Fort Wayne with the police, anything like that, and what your thoughts are on
Can
that?
I just jump in here?
Please.
So if you're familiar with the Renaissance Y area, you know historically that is a space that was occupied by Black Americans for a long time. My mother-in-law talks about going to Bell's all the time. I remember growing up at that multi-use complex, and for whatever reason, I remember when when the Y was on the other side of the street, and we used to go in there, and it smelled like chlorine. Over the year, when I was younger, it was a historical spot, right? That was a gathering space neighborhood for so many people. As I grew older, I watched the decline, as we all saw it. We know the stereotypes associated with that area, those neighborhoods and things like that. And then watching the police department come into that area, and then watching the police department go out of that area, and wondering, okay, this is a weird place. Now what I see, besides the Renaissance Y, is that there are home ownership projects happening over there. The Urban League has revamped, the ACPL has put a location over there. So I see that as an example of restorative and reparative, purposeful intention through multiple facets of our city's organization. If I were in the city, I would brag about it a lot more and say we can do this in lots of other different places. But yeah, it's interesting that it's not bragged on as much, but I do see even a bit of progress in that area.
Awesome.
Sorry.
I was just thinking, it's easy to sit here and think, oh, that's so nice what Amos is doing, and it's serving a certain need, and want you to just fix the whole problem for all of everyone. But it makes me think, like, if you're finding that this basketball works for a certain group and engages a certain group, it kind of puts the responsibility back on everyone here to look at where am I? Who around me needs to be engaged about this? Maybe I know people who work with the police department or the city planning, or maybe I know people who work at a certain school system. It feels like you're doing something where you are to try to work at making that sense of community and bringing wholeness in it. I think the challenge then is on all of us to look at where am I? What can I do? I was just an observation I thought of while listening to this conversation, and how do we kind of each take that as a model?
No, very well stated.
I have a big mouth, but let's see. I guess I'm doing a testimony. Is that, or a testament? Is that what I'm going to do, Amos? Sorry. As someone who has been utilizing the Renaissance Y for a very long time at this point, there's something else I think that really needs to be pointed out. This Renaissance is for everybody, no matter what your age is. And what I have seen that is so beautiful is that when you go into the different programs that are going on, whether it's for all women, like Vanessa's crazy Rumba class that I'm thinking of, what you see happening are relationships developing between all of these different patrons who absolutely adore it. So when people come out at the end of their, whatever it is, whether it's, there's so many, you see new friendships forming. People are getting together. So I just can't speak highly enough of not just Amos, but all of your staff. And I have seen staff at the front desk actually call out members who are coming in, acting inappropriately, and they will tell them, you need to walk out the door, adjust yourself, and then let's try it again. And I think you need to know that. I've seen that. I'm like, yes. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing
everything that you do.
Appreciate it. Everyone gets a raise at the Ren.
How you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Just want to say thanks to the Y. I was a volunteer from the Southeast to the Old Fort to the Renaissance. And I just like to come to things like this. And my thing is, do you really think like this, we are spinning our wheels? Because I'm saying this 2024 is coming up, and there's other races that's striving, and we're like, you know, we're doing the same thing over and over. Well, I'm seeing other races just getting helped, and they're striving, even in our community. So I would just want your thought on the future.
Yeah, no, great question. So this is how I feel about that one. I think something that we need to pay attention to is the fact that these two extremes share a zip code. So we're talking about this oasis that Renaissance Point is, and then someone can literally walk out of Renaissance Point 100 yards to their house, and it's totally different, what they're facing or what they see. So what I'm trying to do right now is say, you're the reason that Renaissance Point is what it is. It's you and your attitude, and it's how you're feeding Renaissance when you're here. If you decide to take this attitude and this appetite back to your particular place, and you don't settle for people messing up your stuff or acting crazy on your block or whatever it is that they're doing, if you take that back and you show some pride there as well, then you're gonna expand the Renaissance essence and spirit. That's really what this is. My job is just to empower people and inform them that they have voice and their actions matter. I hold you extremely accountable in Renaissance Point, but I have no jurisdiction over you outside of that. So what I try to do is just free your mind to think that, hey, I'm really important. That's why we're talking about your health. The things that people aren't, that the individuals that come to this program don't think about, they're not thinking about high blood pressure and diabetes and pre-existing health conditions and all the precursors that can harm them, right? So if we put it at the forefront and we talk about it outside of just basketball, and we're like, no, it's important that you do this, and you take this knowledge back to your household and the people around you, and you make these things important, I think it changes. Now, I will say this, it appears we've been slow to the party. We're late arrivers. But what I will say is, I won't claim the fact that it's not getting better.
And just to piggyback off of that, I appreciate that question. And I think I had it somewhere in my mind when I wanted to reframe this conversation. We know preschool to pipeline, we know. We know that housing values, we know. We know voting, we know. What are we doing differently? And I think it's so important to question how we frame what we're saying about what we're saying. So even if it's from something as simple from thinking that our relationship to poor and Black and brown communities is that we enforce, right? We want to make sure they're following the rules. We want to make sure that they're moving it to that, from that to more engaging. Explain to me why you made these kinds of decisions, things like that. I think it helps us as Black Americans and brown Americans realize that we frame ourselves, right? So with the statistics of minorities arresting minorities, why is it easier for you to arrest minorities as a minority? Because you're working on behalf of this and there's more at stake as an individual. So there's a lot of dynamics that are going into play as individuals, and I think the one thing we can collectively address is that maybe we should reframe our approach to Black and brown communities.
I don't want to be a downer, and so hopefully you can like flip this. But you were talking about high blood pressure. Everyone can hear me be a downer. So you were talking about health stuff, like you have people come in and they have to do the health screening, you're talking about high blood pressure, things like that, take that energy home. That doesn't necessarily help if they're living in a food poverty, I can't remember the phrase now.
Food desert.
Food desert, yes. It doesn't help them get a job. Having a better attitude doesn't necessarily do that. So what are the steps if they've got that attitude that they've gotten from you? I think there's more to be done because, again, if they walk outside and they live 100 yards, if they don't have transportation, if there's not a market nearby where they can get actual fresh food so that they can eat better, you need more than just a positive attitude to overcome poverty, to find a job, to be able to get to that job. So what are the other steps you would, what are the other steps you would recommend that people that you talk to on a regular basis do, or the neighborhood should be doing?
All right, so there's a lot to unpack there. So I'm gonna try to get, if I missed something, you tell me. So first, we'll talk about the health thing. If you don't know that it's a thing, and I can enlighten you that it is a thing, then maybe you make a better decision. So here's the thing. If you're, that was a lot of things. So if you go home and you drink a Mountain Dew, and you understand that that can contribute to diabetes, and I get you to drink a water, I'm helping. Now, you're still gonna make your choice, but now you can make the choice based off of knowledge that you've obtained. Now it's a possibility for you to do better because you know better. People are gonna do what they want to do. I'm excited right now, the Pontiac Street Market is coming. That's gonna be awesome. I just had a meeting with their general manager about how we can help. What can Renaissance Point do? A lot of people don't know, we have an in-house food pantry right now. And we partner with some pretty awesome people that help. Trinity English Lutheran helps. They help us with food vouchers and things of that nature. All we can do is provide an opportunity, right? I don't want to be in the food game. And I told the general manager, I don't want a food pantry. I want to support you that can do this better than me, but my community's asking for this, we need it. So I'm stepping into a role, but I would like to step out and support the expert. That's the spirit of it. It's really about how do I connect to the expert and not have to be the expert. I don't want to have a late night basketball program that's combating crime and homicide when it's statistically at its highest points in these area codes because I don't want any crime and homicide there, right? Then maybe it becomes midday basketball, right? I don't know. It could be anything. It's just about showing up for the need. It's about giving information out. And it's not, I don't want to create this indictment on individuals that have it tough to say they'll never make it out. Because everybody has an opportunity for this epiphany moment. And it could be something that they hear and they're like, oh my gosh, I got to turn my life around, right? It happens to everyone. It happens to rich people, it happens to poor people, it happens to white people, it happens to black people. There's always some pivotal moment or pivotal piece of information that you hear that's transformative in your life. So my job is to just keep throwing them out and hopefully something sticks. And it could be that you take this one and that's great and your life is a little bit better. Or it could be that one, or you take none of them. And that's unfortunate, but we can't act like people don't have the responsibility of kind of living too. I can't do it all. I can provide opportunities for what I know, and then you got to take it from there.
Thank you. We're at time. I was just going to conclude things. But we can have further conversation after if you would like. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Well, I do want to thank Amos for being here. I do want to say, kind of to your point and to the gentleman's point in the back and the multiple points that Amos was making, is that in this conversation, this can be directed towards law enforcement. This can be directed towards community partners. This can be directed towards people in education, in the realm of education. I think it's important for us to kind of back away, again, from the associations that we make. Some of that includes for us within the community, right, to reframe what we have access to, not access to, but what we at least think of ourselves, perhaps, what we understand our options and possibilities are for our future. Amos, in terms of community education with the health kind of things that, hey, did you know your blood pressure is particularly high this week? I've seen where police department and the fire department have come and said, hey guys, this is what it takes to be a firefighter or police. Like, that in and of itself is profound, right? Because to say that as a black person, the possibility of being a police officer is actually within my realm. that is the type of education I think that he and people in his field are providing. Their influence goes on exponentially, right? Someone's mimicking Amos by saying, hey, that's not the culture here. Those are impacts, small victories that I'm willing to take, as long as we as individuals continue to promise to work on reframing how we engage each other, and specifically Black and brown communities. So with that being said, let me just go through this over here. The YWCA has a couple different things coming up. We have a coffee and conversation. The next one will be September 17th. The title is Be a Forrest Gump, Refusing to Let Your Fears Stop You. I think that is such a great topic. Our next diversity dialogue, the topic will be thankfulness and diversity. It'll be Thursday, November 9th, here in this room. And if it is shaping up to be what I hope it is, I'm super excited. And we also extend the invitation, if you are interested, the YWCA Northeast Indiana has openings available. If you are interested in getting your foot in the door to work with people who are on a mission. So thanks again for your being an audience, for your questions, and thank you to Amos for your participation and everything that you do for our community.
Thank you.